Okay, hi everyone. We're going to get started because it is 3 o'clock and we have quite a bit to get through. If you can't hear us, let us know. If you can't see us or if you can't see the slides, let us know. You should be seeing a chat box on the side there. We'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. So if you have anything to say to us, don't hesitate. But we'll just get started right now. So I'm Maureen Babb.
And I'm Angela Osterreicher.
And we're going to be presenting on evidence-based practice and levels of evidence today. So this is a very large topic, and I do want to sort of emphasize that this is going to be an introduction to the topic, rather than a math overview. This could have filled an entire course. So in terms of our objectives, we're going to briefly introduce the WRHA virtual library and our services. We're going to describe evidence-based practice and its history. We're going to describe the evidence pyramid and selected categories of evidence, such as systematic reviews. And we're going to discuss incorporating evidence-based practice into your work. So hopefully that's what you'll get out of it. Again, this is an introduction, but if you have any follow-up questions or if you want to learn more about this, feel free to message us or ask for further information or even further instruction sessions, and we'll be happy to work on those for you. So we're the WRHA Virtual Library. We provide service to WRHA staff, eligible community health agencies, and eligible personal care homes. We also provide access to an array of electronic resources and library services such as literature searches, document delivery for anything that we don't have direct electronic access to, and education and training sessions like this one. We should also briefly note that we will be closed for the holiday season. So that is from the 22nd to the 3rd.
Yes, we're back up 3rd.
Yeah, and so we'll be briefly closed, but then back to provide these services for you, and you can still access our website and all the resources that we have while we're closed for the holidays. So we're going to start with sort of the concept of evidence-based. What is it? Where did it come from? What's its history? So in 1992, the concept of evidence-based medicine was introduced. It was sort of introduced as a way of teaching, and particularly focusing on treatment of patients and policy development. This expanded into evidence-based practice, evidence-based policy, and even other disciplines. So from evidence-based medicine to, for example, evidence-based librarianship, which we strive to practice. Evidence-based practice has sort of 3 areas that it brings into it. So it's looking at the best research evidence available, the clinical expertise, and patient preference. And we're not really going to touch on patient preference because we can't provide information on that. That's up to the patient. But we do want to talk about using the best evidence possible and getting the most information available. And an important thing to remember is that there isn't always, there's a hierarchy of evidence. There's levels of evidence. This type of information is better than that type of information, but you don't always have access to the best types of information if it's a new field or just an understudied field, or even if a lot of the information in it was from quite a while ago and for whatever reason hasn't been updated, you have to consider that when you're considering your evidence. So think about the types of evidence that you have and what they are, where they fall on the continuum of evidence, because it's not as simple as conducting evidence-based practice versus not conducting evidence-based practice. It's not just you do this and therefore it's evidence-based practice and therefore it's great, or you don't do this and therefore it's not evidence-based practice and therefore it's garbage. There's a range. And you can make either strong recommendations or weak recommendations or anything in between with the information that you have available. So when you're looking at the evidence, whatever it is, it's not just enough to say, well, yeah, I looked up information and incorporated it into my practice, and that's great. You have to consider how much evidence do you have, how good is that evidence, and how strong a recommendation can you be making? How strong is this thing that you're proposing? So we're going to talk briefly about the evidence pyramid. This one is, there are a couple of different layouts to the evidence pyramid going around. This is the one we like to use at the library here. And you can see at the very bottom, there's expert opinion, and at the very top, there's systematic reviews, and there's an arrow up the side talking about the quality of evidence. So as you get to the peak of the pyramid, that's where your best quality evidence is. And in this case, it's systematic reviews. And you can see off to the side there, we've got filtered information versus unfiltered information. So filtered information is information that either, well, actually, we'll get to that in a different slide, so I won't talk about it just yet. But unfiltered information, you know, a randomized control trial is good, but it's one randomized control trial. So you can only do so much with it. So yes, filtered versus unfiltered information. Filtered information, there's summaries, analyses, syntheses, and appraisals of evidence from primary sources. So you get systematic reviews, you get meta-analyses, and you get clinical practice guidelines. We'll be talking about some of these in more detail as we carry on. And if I seem like I'm going fast, it's because we're trying to cram a bunch of stuff into half an hour. So hopefully we're not going too fast, but if we are, just let us know again, and we'll try and balance it out. But if you have any further questions, again, feel free to email us after for clarification or anything like that. Unfiltered evidence in comparison to filtered evidence is primary sources of information. So your studies, your randomized controlled trials, your clinical trials, your cohort studies, things like that. And we'll be talking about some of those in detail as well, but not all of them because we only have half an hour. So in terms of systematic reviews, and I've got a quote here, systematic review seeks to systematically search for, appraise, and synthesize evidence, often adhering to the guidelines on the conduct of a review provided by the Cochrane Collaboration or the NHS Center for Reviews and Dissemination. It is transparent in the reporting and methods, or of its methods, to facilitate others to replicate the process. So you want to not only bring in information, you want to assess the quality of that information, summarize it, and systematic reviews usually present a general conclusion about what the information is saying, and therefore what the best conclusion we have based on the available evidence is, whereas a randomized controlled trial is looking, for example, at only the findings of one study. A systematic review is looking at the findings of many studies. Meta-analyses are similar. Meta-analyses are sort of any collection of information that's put forward, but they don't necessarily have the same transparency or the same rigor of systematic reviews. And in particular, the Cochrane reviews are extremely rigorous and extremely precise in their processes. And a thing to consider as we're going through this, like we're saying that systematic reviews are the best, but there are certainly things published that are called, that in the journal, they're called systematic reviews, but if you actually look at them, you're like, well, is this actually a good systematic review? Is it actually rigorous? Is it actually adhering to the principles that it says it's adhering to? And unfortunately, not all of them are. So it's not enough to just look at a systematic review and read the abstract and say, oh yeah, good enough. Do take the time to assess even systematic reviews as you're going through them.
Yeah, there are appraisal.
Yeah, there are appraisal tools.
I think one is called Consort for systematic reviews that you can use.
Yeah, is that for randomized control?
Oh, maybe.
Anyways, sorry, there are tools available, and we can point you towards some of them if you if you want to know if a systematic review you're looking at is any good or not. One of the things that we watch for when we look at that is looking at their search strategies in systematic reviews, which A, should be reported, and B, should be quality search strategies. But that might be slightly different than your initial go-to if you were assessing a systematic review, which is why the tools are important, because that highlights more things. So, oh, and I've got a little arrow pointing to systematic reviews at the top, which I always forget that I have these arrows. So key characteristics of systematic reviews: they have clear objectives, they have predefined eligibility criteria. So that means you have to decide what kind of studies are going to be included or excluded before you can conduct one. You have to have an explicit reproducible methodology for your systematic review. You have to have a systematic search, and usually you should be bringing in a librarian for that, which, by the way, the WRHA virtual library will help you out with conducting systematic reviews if that's something that you are interested in doing. We won't talk about that here, but if you want to, send us an email, let us know. They also need to have an assessment of the validity of the findings included in the studies, and a systematic presentation and synthesis of the characteristics and findings of the included studies. So it's not just enough to say this is what's out there. You have to say this is what's out there. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. These are the findings. This is, when you put them all together, what they're suggesting. So where can you find systematic reviews? You can search for them specifically in PubMed and Medline. You can also search directly at the Cochrane database of systematic reviews. The ones in Cochrane, if they're Cochrane reviews, tend to be, as I said, of higher quality than some of the other systematic reviews that are out there. I am going to pass it off to Angela now to talk about randomized controlled trials.
Yes, so randomized controlled trials are considered to be the gold standards for research. They are in the midpoint of the pyramid, but they are at the top of the unfiltered information. And they often form the body of literature for systematic reviews, which is at the top of the pyramid. So it's considered it's an experimental study, as it does test for interventions, for treatments or for drugs. And RCTs are said to be the strongest evidence because they do use a control and placebo group, and participants are randomly allocated into the experimental group or the control group. So that reduces any allocation bias. And what we mean is that there's equal chance of either group receiving the intervention or control. And ideally, it would also be blinded. It could be blinded just for the participants, or possibly the participants and the care providers, or hopefully all three: participants, care providers, and those that are assessing the outcomes. That they do not know who is receiving the intervention or the control. So this is the best type of study to provide evidence of cause and effect, and the data that's gathered can be statistically analyzed. They are time-consuming and expensive because groups are followed over a period of time for the outcome of interest, and they may not be suitable for ethical reasons. So for example, when there's harmful exposures, if you're looking at surgeries, then this may not be possible to do in RCT.
Or like causes of diseases.
Yes.
Don't just go around injecting people with diseases. Bad form, guys. Don't do it.
So in this case, you might want to use an analytical or observational study, such as cohort or case control studies.
Yep.
So cohorts, I mentioned, although they are further down the evidence pyramid, a well-designed observational study can provide evidence in instances where an RCT or randomization is not possible. It's useful in evaluating associations between diseases and exposures, and the outcome measure is the risk ratio or relative risk. A cohort is a group of people with a defined characteristics are followed to determine the incidence of or the mortality from a specific disease, causes of death, or some other outcome. So ideally, you do have two groups, and that they are identical. By that, I mean from the same source population. They're identical except for their exposure status. So you end up with a control or unexposed versus an exposed group. So usually cohorts are prospective, but they can also be retrospectively done. So in that case, the exposure outcome has already happened. There's no randomization with cohorts, and blinding is difficult, and the outcome can take quite a time to occur.
So I'm going to interrupt you briefly because we have a question here,
Oh, okay.
which is, do we recommend the Joanna Briggs Institute for Systematic Reviews?
Yes.
And yes, we do. Joanna Briggs tends to have more, they tend to incorporate more gray literature and have more of the less clinical questions as well. And they are very good sources as well.
Synthesizing the information, yes.
Yeah, so also an excellent source. Thank you for asking, and apologies for not mentioning it on the website or on the slides to begin with.
So the other one was the analytical observation study. Could be a case control. So if you can't do a randomized clinical control trial, then a case control might be what you're looking for. It is a retrospective study, and it's a comparison of patients who have a disease or outcome of interest with patients who do not have the disease or outcome, the control group. So you are looking back retrospectively, and you usually end up with an odds ratio. Advantages of doing using case control studies are they're great for rare conditions or diseases. You can look at multiple risk factors, and you can establish an association. Disadvantages are data quality. You're relying on the memory of people with the condition. It's hard to find a suitable control group, and it's not good for evaluating diagnostic tests because it's not randomized.
On to the next slide?
On to the next slide.
Right. Oops, I guess I actually need to click on the slide deck here. Okay.
So we also have clinical practice guidelines. Guidelines are recommendations for clinicians about the care of patients with specific conditions. Guidelines translate the best evidence into best practice, and they are just below systematic reviews. The content of a guideline is based on a systematic review of clinical evidence. CPGs promote quality healthcare because they reduce variations in care, they improve diagnostic accuracy, they promote effective therapy, they reduce potential harmful interventions. But the methodology for guidelines is often poorly defined.
Yeah.
So it's not, the methodology is not transparent or reproducible in some cases, and it can vary from organization to organization.
Yeah, so when you're looking for guidelines, you may see from this place and that place and that place, and maybe this place has really good methodology clearly defined on their website, but another place might be presenting their guidelines and you have no idea what methodology they used or even who was constructing them.
They can also be slow to change or be updated, so you have to be aware of that. They are expensive and very time consuming to create.
Just like everything else on here.
Yeah. And you have to consider the bias in the recommendations depending on the type of organization creating the guideline. So you're going to look for panels because they are done by expert panels generally, and that you have a good variety of representation from associations or government agencies or other institutes, and not just from one organization. So basically, not all guidelines are equal, and there are appraisal tools out there. One of them is called Agree-To. And I think the next slide we show where we can find
and
some
we should
sources.
Clarify that Agree-To is agree Roman numerals 2.
Roman numerals,
yeah.
So you can find, these are just some sources where you can find guidelines. There's CPG Infobase, PubMed, TRIP database there is a free version. You don't have access to everything, but it's a good starting point. And of course, we do have a toolkit that we have produced of where to find practice guidelines. So hopefully you'll use that.
Yes, and that toolkit contains some more information about guidelines in general as well. So feel free to have a look at that.
So just to sum things up, evidence-based practice is an approach to care that integrates the best available research evidence with clinical expertise and patient values. So hopefully in this very short presentation, we've shown you the importance of using evidence for making decisions and understanding that there are various levels of quality of evidence. You're able to find a few systematic reviews and guidelines. We've provided you with a few resources for that. And hopefully you're aware that the WRHA Virtual Library is here to help you. We can help conduct literature searches for you to find the best evidence. We provide training on how to search the databases if you wish to do it yourself. We can help set up subject or journal alerts to help you keep current with the literature. And we have the toolkits that we've mentioned for quick access to evidence.
Yep. And we can help you with systematic reviews if you want.
So this has been a very, very brief overview of evidence. There are lots of other resources out there. I know that in the past, and hopefully they still do have, the WRHA had a workshop. It was, I think, a minimum 2-day workshop on evidence-informed practice tools. If you Google WRHA and EIPT, you should be able to find them. There is some information on the internet, and I think there's some information that the WRHA would have on their intranet.
Which we can't see, so we don't know for sure if it's there or not.
But there you'll find care maps, clinical protocols, CPGs, algorithms, and standing orders, as well as information about the workshop that they provide. Yeah,
so if you are curious, go check out some of these other resources about evidence. As I say, we are here for additional conversations and the literature searches. We're happy to do literature searches on any topic. It doesn't need to be a topic that's, you're finding it very difficult to find something for. You can just be like, I want more information on this. I don't have the time to do the search. I'm going to send it to one of these librarians and they'll send me stuff. So feel free. And that concludes our presentation, which amazingly we finished on time. So we've still got about 5 minutes. If anybody has any further questions, we'll stay on the line for now. Feel free. And the slides, we will be sending them out tomorrow as well. We'll be posting this webinar on the website tomorrow as well. And you can watch this one and other webinars that we have already done on the website. We've also recently announced our upcoming webinars for next term. So once we come back January, February, March, and April. So if you want to go check those out and see what we're offering, feel free. I'd list them for you, but I don't remember what they are off the top of my head. So
apps are coming up.
Yeah, healthcare apps. Keeping current with the literature. That's coming up for sure. Oh, and we are going to have one just on guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't remember what the fourth one is, but another riveting.
Stay tuned. So give us some feedback, what worked, what didn't work for you in this webinar, and certainly send us any suggestions for webinars that you're interested in having.
We know that typing can take a while, so we're just going to mute ourselves, but we'll stay on the line. But if you don't have any questions, feel free to log off, I guess, unless you want to see other people's questions. But so far we don't have any, so we'll just mute ourselves for now.